So I think we should probably go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Diane Waggoner, who arrived after a harrowing day. Thank you so much for being here. Diane is curator of 19th century photographs in the Department of Photographs at the National Gallery of Art. She's previously held positions at the Yale University Art Gallery and the Huntington Library and the art collections of Botanical Gardens. There's a number of exhibits that she has co-curated or curated. A few that caught my attention. The Art of the American Snapshot, 1888 to 1978, from the collection of Robert Jackson. That was in 2007. East of the Mississippi, 19th century American landscape photography, which was in 2017. And most recently, The Eye of the Sun, 19th century photographs from the National Gallery of Art, which I had a great experience going to the press tour. Gosh, it just seems like a few months ago. Anyway, tonight Diane is going to talk about all of the wonderful things that the National Gallery has in the way of Civil War photography. So please give a warm welcome to Diane. Folks on Facebook are saying, I wish I could be there.
Plans for next year, we'll be doing it again.
Exactly.
All right. Well, hello, and I want to first thank Ron for inviting me to give this talk. And I understand that last year you had Ann Schumard and colleague at the Library of Congress talking about their holdings of Civil War photography. So I feel like I'm in very good company. But I also want to say that if you had asked me to do this 5 years ago, I would have said, no, I can't, because the National Gallery has almost no Civil War photography. And that may come as a bit of a surprise to you. I think most people would probably assume that the National Gallery of Art would have a great collection of Civil War photography, but actually it's an area that we've made great strides in over about the last 5 years, but it's an area that we would really like to keep building on and make into a much more significant collection. What I'm showing you here is the first Civil War photograph that came into the collection in 1995. Just as a little bit of background, the National Gallery of Art started collecting photography in 1990 when Sarah Greeno founded the Department of Photographs there, and you may know her, she's still the head of the department. The collection itself was founded by a gift that George O'Keeffe made in 1949 of what's called the key set of Alfred Stieglitz's photographs. And when the gallery decided to first collect photography, a decision was made to sort of focus on acquiring great photographers in great depth on the model of the Stieglitz collection. So we then acquired a large Robert Frank collection, Harry Callahan, and so on. But there wasn't any 19th century photography being acquired at the time until 1995, when a collection from Mary and David Robinson collectors in San Francisco came into the collection that began to give the foundation for expanding the collection beyond just focusing on particular photographers in great depth. And this George Barner that you see on the screen was part of that group. And I believe it was the only Civil War photography in that particular collection. So flash forward about another 11 years to 2006, when we acquired, and I should also mention that I joined the Department of Photographs in 2004. So I've been there for close to 16 years now. And so in 2006, we acquired a large collection from collectors Mary and Dan Solomon that included a few very wonderful Civil War photographs. This is one of the two from George Barnard's photographic views of Sherman's campaign. And those are both loose prints from that portfolio. Columbia from the Capitol on the left, and Orchard Knob from Mission Ridge. Both, of course, taken in the South. the one on the right from around in Tennessee and Lookout Mountain. This is another Barnard that we acquired a little bit later, also from photographic views of Sherman's campaign of the rebel works in front of Atlanta, Georgia, number 4. And then we, a few years ago, we acquired a group of works by Isaac Bonsall, who, of course, like Barnard, had worked for the Army of the Cumberland in the Western Theater of the War, you know, photographing in much the same areas that Barnard had, but did some of these scenic views of Lula Lake, like this one that you see. This is the Upper Falls on Lookout Mountain in Georgia. And then this one on the left, I believe that's the lower falls of Lula Lake. And of course you see the figures there in the foreground. And then this one also of Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I believe he was stationed with the Army and took a series of photographs. Also in the Solomon collection from 2006 were 2 loose prints from Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the war. So you see Alexander Gardner's Sharpshooter's Last Sleep from Gettysburg on the left, and Timothy O'Sullivan's Field Where General Reynolds Fell, both from Gettysburg. So 2 of the photographs in Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the dead on the battlefield. And then a couple of years ago, we acquired our first Andrew Russell from the Civil War. This one, his stone wall from the rear of Fredericksburg, showing the dead from the Battle of Fredericksburg. And here I'm showing you an installation shot from the exhibition that Ron just mentioned that was we had on view last fall, called The Eye of the Sun, and this was the room where some of the Civil War material was shown. So you can see on the wall, these are the 2 Barnards on the Gardner. And I will say that this is actually the first time we had ever shown those photographs. I had not had an opportunity to show them, put them on public view until this exhibition. But you'll also see down here something that we were very, very happy to acquire last year, which is finally our own copy of Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the war. It was something we had wanted to acquire for a long time. Of course, many of you will know that many of the copies are already in public collections, so we were thrilled to be able to finally acquire one that's in really good condition with very wonderful, rich prints. I happen to have this open to the this one, the David Woodbury of the Military Bridge across the Chickahominy, and the John Reiki of the burial place at Cold Harbor, that just haunting photograph showing the, you know, the dead being buried. And then of course, I'm sure you'll all recognize some of the other ones from Gardner's photographic sketchbook, Timothy O'Sullivan of the High Bridge, crossing the Appomattox from towards the end of the war. I just showed you the Woodbury, of course, the Alexander Gardner with Lincoln on the battlefield of Antietam, the John Reiki, and then another Alexander Gardner of the ruins of Arsenal from Richmond, Virginia. So that, of course, just a selection from Gardner's photographic sketchbook. Besides that, so that really pretty much comprises our larger scale battlefield, landscape, Civil War material. We've also been collecting a lot of portraits, Civil War portraits. So this is a Samuel Broadbent of 3 soldiers, which I will say I found at the DC Photo Show a couple of years ago. We acquired it a couple of years ago. And some more cased objects like this, the tin type on the right, and that amber type there on the left. A couple more cased objects. You can see portraits of soldiers. And here again, I'm showing you the case that was in that room in Eye of the Sun, where I was able to put some of them on view. So there you see the Broadbent. That's one of the 2 soldiers. And then you'll see these carte de visite down here. And that is another area that we've acquired a nice selection of carte de visite related to the Civil War in the last year, including these of African Americans. So of course we have the iconic, one of the most iconic images of related to American slavery, of the scourged back, or sometimes it's called Gordon the Whipped Slave. I mean, it's a very difficult image, I find, to look at, of course, but it was such an important image during the Civil War, as it was used by so many of the abolitionists to try to promote the end of slavery. And I'm sure many of you know the story of this particular photograph and the formerly enslaved man who's pictured there, because there's a famous article in Harper's Weekly telling a story about how he escaped from a plantation in Louisiana or Mississippi and found his way to a Union encampment. And the story went that he had covered himself with onions in order to throw off the scent of bloodhounds. And then when he arrived in the Union Army camp, he underwent a medical exam, and they saw that his back was very scarred. And of course, we don't know if he consented to having this photograph taken of him, and so on. But of course, it was taken, and then very, very heavily copied and sold widely, particularly in the Northeast. This is a little bit less well-known one called regular contraband. Of course, contraband was the term given to formerly enslaved men and women who found their way to the Union encampments before, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation. And then this one is called, well, it's inscribed on the back, Pet of the Regiment. And this was a young man who I believe was with one of the New York regiments and must have served as some sort of a servant, because you see the same young man in some stereos of the New York Regiment encampments. And then this one is from that series of portraits that was done by Gifford and Speidel of one of the regiments that was formed after the Emancipation Proclamation of an African American regiment. And this was done as a series, I think, probably for the commanding officer. Because it wasn't done, they weren't personal portraits taken by the soldiers, because there's a series of them, and written on the back is the name of the person and information about them. And then, of course, we have some of our Civil War generals, Joseph Hooker here, Custer, and then, of course, Grant. Some more of the generals, there's Sherman, Abram Durgay, and General Elzey, so at least one Confederate general there. And then some of the soldiers, of course, Francis Brownell, the Avenger of Ellsworth, and Frederick Dutasse, and then just some more, lesser well-known, one named John Boyle and Captain James Gillette. And then a few showing military encampments. This is a naval scene, the USS New Hampshire, and then these are various camp scenes. And then a couple related to Lincoln, so Lincoln and Mary Todd, and then of course the conspirators. And then finally a few from the series of the children who were part of that tour to the Northeast from Louisiana. They were formerly enslaved children, and they were toured around various cities in the Northeast in order to raise money for the education of formerly enslaved children and men and women in Louisiana. And of course, there are many of these, since it was such a popular series. And then finally, I thought I would end with a couple of photographs that are not Civil War related, but were taken during the time of the Civil War. And I always find it really fascinating how much photography was still being made during the years of the Civil War that really wasn't related to the war itself. These are two photographs by Thomas H. Johnson, who was opened a studio in Scranton in 1863 and did a series of photographs for the Delaware and Hudson Railroad and Canal Company in sometime between 1863 and 1865. And these are two from that series and two more. There you are during the heart of the Civil War, and you wouldn't know that anything like that was going on, but certainly showing how robust the coal mining industry was becoming during the 1860s. And then a completely different mood, but made at pretty much exactly the same time, two John Morans of the landscape in Pennsylvania, Broadheads Creek, the Delaware Water Gap, and then the Wissahickon Creek near Philadelphia. You know, and again, I just have always found it so fascinating that these photographers were going out and making these despite the fact of, you know, everything that was going on with the war. So, you know, those are the strides that we've really made, and mostly in the last 5 years. We would love to acquire more. So, you know, if anybody would like to help us do that, put in a bid, that would be really wonderful. We would, you know, I feel like the National Gallery of Art should have a significant collection of Civil War photography, and I'm really proud of how far we've come, but there is still more to do from there. So I think that's really about all I have.
Wonderful.
So I'm happy to take questions. Yes.
Are there any particular photographs from the Civil War that you would maybe be searching for or looking for?
Well, we would. The highest on our wish list, of course, is a copy of Barnard's photographic views of Sherman's campaign.
Yeah.
That would, you know, as any Civil War collector would want, you know, that's what yeah.
The difference between the different government collections in different places, you know, what are you trying to do that's different from maybe than the Library of Congress or other places?
Right. Well, you know, I mean, the Library of Congress is a library, for one thing, and, you know, we are an art museum. And so, you know, of course, there is going to be some duplication between this, but, you know, our mission as the National Gallery of Art is to collect the finest works of art. And I think that in terms of photography, you know, we have a little bit broader mandate than, say, my colleagues might in paintings and sculpture or even prints and drawings, because we also feel that it's important for us to collect the finest examples of photography in all its forms. You know, so we're not just limited to what has traditionally been defined as an art photograph. I mean, I mentioned that's the way that the collection started with Alfred Stieglitz, Robert Frank, and so on. But, you know, we have expanded upon that enormously, not just in terms of Civil War, of course, but we have a lot of vernacular photographs, we have scientific photographs, and so on. So, you know, we have a very broad definition of what that means, but, you know, we'd certainly want them to be the finest examples that we can find.
Yeah, I can see of your selection here, the art quality, you know, the view, from most Civil War collectors does not have the John Moran.
Right. I mean, I don't really count that as a Civil War photograph, but yes, I mean, in terms of the picture of what's going on in photography in America in the 1860s, of course, the Civil War is the main thing that is happening, but there are other things that are happening too.
There's been a lot of buzz, I think, over the last couple of weeks about the open access collection that's coming online.
At the Smithsonian?
Yes, it's all the items that are being digitized and being released through Facebook. One of the Facebook page editors discovered the identities of some previously unidentified folks in the National Portrait Gallery collection, and I don't know if this is something that that your institution is participating in or has an interest in.
Actually, the National Gallery of Art has been open access for quite some time.
Ah, good.
For quite a few years.
Ah, okay.
You know, and so everything that we have goes up online unless there are copyright restrictions to it, and we make everything available free. You know, and again, for anybody to download for any kind of use, publication, you know, whatever. You know, we don't charge for that. It's, and again, you know, only subject to copyright restrictions. So our 19th century collection is certainly all up online and available for use.
Good, good. Other questions? All right. Diane, thank you so much.